By the autumn of 1944, the strategic situation for Nazi Germany was catastrophic. The successful Allied landings in Normandy had opened a relentless second front in the west, while in the east, the Soviet steamroller was advancing inexorably toward the borders of the Reich itself. But perhaps the most immediate and visible sign of collapse was in the skies above Germany. American B-17 and B-24 bomber formations, now protected by long-range P-51 Mustang fighters, roamed almost at will, methodically reducing German cities and industrial capacity to rubble. The Luftwaffe, bled white by years of war, was caught in an impossible vice. It was critically short of experienced pilots, avgas was becoming a precious commodity, and the production of its advanced aircraft was hopelessly vulnerable to this around-the-clock bombing. In this maelstrom of defeat, the German High Command placed its faith in technological wonder weapons, or Wunderwaffen, to turn the tide. They did possess one such weapon that was genuinely revolutionary: the Messerschmitt Me-262, the world's first operational jet fighter. It was a machine so advanced that it could fly circles around the best Allied prop planes. Yet, for all its speed and firepower, the Me-262 was a victim of its own sophistication. Its complex Jumo 004 jet engines were notoriously unreliable and had a tragically short service life. Its construction required scarce strategic materials and highly skilled labor, and its production lines were prime targets for Allied bombers. Furthermore, its development had been plagued by high-level interference, most infamously Hitler's insistence it be used as a bomber, which delayed its introduction as a fighter. The Me-262 was a marvel, but it was arriving too late, in too few numbers, to change the course of the war. It was a scalpel in a fight that now required a cheap, mass-produced hammer. Driven by this desperation, the Reich Air Ministry conceived of a program so radical it defied conventional military logic. In September 1944, they launched the Volksjäger, the People's Fighter competition. The specifications they issued were, by any peacetime standard, insane. They demanded a new jet fighter be designed from a blank sheet of paper, one that could be built using the absolute minimum of strategic materials like aluminum. It had to be simple enough to be constructed by semi-skilled and unskilled labor, including forced laborers, in dispersed and often crude underground facilities safe from bombers. The timeline was the most staggering demand of all. They wanted a flyable prototype in a matter of weeks, with mass production to begin just months after the design was approved. The core of this new aircraft would be a single BMW 003 jet engine, which was less powerful and more available than the Me-262's engines. Despite this simpler power plant, the performance requirements were brutally high. The new plane had to be fast enough to outperform any enemy aircraft it might encounter. But the most telling specification of all, one that revealed the true depth of Germany's despair, was the demand for extreme simplicity. This was not just for rapid production. It was intended to be flown by a new generation of pilots. The vision was for the Volksjäger to be flown by young, hastily trained members of the Hitler Youth, who would learn the basics of flight in crude gliders before being thrown into this high-speed jet. It was a concept born of total war, where the machine was considered more expendable than the life of the pilot inside it. This was the impossible challenge thrown at Germany's aircraft designers: to create a war-winning weapon out of wood, glue, and teenage fervor. The contract for this seemingly impossible project was awarded to the Heinkel Aircraft Company, whose design, known internally as the P.1073, was selected as the winner. It was not a machine of elegant, refined aerodynamics, but rather a masterpiece of brutal simplicity and radical compromise, reflecting the dire circumstances of its birth. Every aspect of its design was a trade-off, prioritizing speed of production and conservation of resources above all else. The most striking compromise was its primary construction material. With aluminum reserves critically low, the He-162's fuselage was built not of metal, but of wood. It was essentially a glued and nailed wooden airframe, a decision that harkened back to the early days of aviation and allowed for production to be subcontracted to furniture makers and woodworking shops completely unaccustomed to building high-performance aircraft. The aircraft's most visually distinctive and controversial feature was the placement of its single BMW 003 jet engine. Instead of being slung under the wings or integrated into the fuselage, the engine was mounted directly on top of the aircraft's back. This unorthodox configuration offered some key advantages for a desperate manufacturing effort. It simplified the fuselage structure, as there was no need to design a complex intake tunnel running through the body of the plane. It also made the engine remarkably accessible for maintenance and swap-outs. Ground crews could literally unbolt it from above without complex jigs or equipment. However, this choice came with a terrifyingly dangerous drawback. Mounting the heavy engine so high above the aircraft's center of gravity made it inherently unstable. If the engine mounts were to fail, a very real risk given the vibration of early jet engines and the less robust wooden structure, the entire power plant could tear loose and catastrophically destabilize the aircraft, or worse, sever the tail section entirely. This very real danger necessitated another first. The He-162 was one of the earliest operational aircraft in the world to be equipped with a standardized ejection seat. It was a stark admission that the design was so perilous that the pilot needed a guaranteed way to escape the certain disaster of a failing airframe. In a small concession to modernity and ease of handling for its intended novice pilots, the aircraft featured a tricyclic landing gear, a more modern arrangement than the taildragger configuration common on many fighters of the era. The pace at which this radical design became a flying reality remains one of the most staggering feats, or follies, in the history of aviation development. The official go-ahead for the Volksjager program was given on September 8, 1944. From that moment, the project was propelled by a near-maniacal urgency. Heinkel's team worked around the clock, and the design, wind tunnel testing, and construction of the first prototypes were compressed into a period that would normally take years. Mere weeks later, the first prototype airframes were taking shape. This breakneck pace culminated on December 6, 1944, less than 90 days after the project was officially approved, with the first prototype He-162 taking to the skies on its maiden flight. This timeline from drawing board to first flight in under 3 months was and is virtually unprecedented for a jet aircraft. Even as flight testing began, the immense production machinery was already lurching into motion. By early 1945, mass production of the He-162 had begun in earnest. To protect them from the relentless Allied bombing campaign, final assembly lines were established in hidden, dispersed locations, including vast underground salt mines and concealed tunnels dug into forested hills. This was a truly decentralized and frantic effort, with components being manufactured across Germany and Austria before being brought together for final assembly in these clandestine facilities, all while the Reich crumbled around them. The breakneck speed of the He-162's development came at a devastating cost, revealing fundamental flaws that were baked into the design from its very inception. The warning signs appeared almost immediately. During a high-speed, low-level flight demonstration for high-ranking Nazi officials just days after its first flight, the first prototype suffered a catastrophic structural failure. The adhesive bonding the wooden leading edge of its wing came undone, causing the wing to rip apart and sending the aircraft crashing, killing its test pilot. This tragedy was a grim portent of the inherent vulnerabilities of its construction. The wood and glue airframe, while ideal for conserving metal, was notoriously susceptible to manufacturing inconsistencies, humidity, and the immense stresses of high-speed flight, making structural integrity a constant and deadly concern. Beyond the weakness of its materials, the He-162 possessed flight characteristics that were dangerously unforgiving. In the air, it was a thoroughbred in the worst sense of the word. Nervous, twitchy, and brutally sensitive to control inputs. The rudder, in particular, was notoriously oversensitive, and a pilot who was too heavy-handed could easily throw the aircraft into a sudden and unrecoverable roll. This vicious handling, especially at high speeds, meant the jet demanded the calm, expert touch of a highly experienced pilot. This reality stood in stark, ironic contrast to its original purpose as a plane for hastily trained novices. The intended Hitler Youth pilot would have had almost no chance of mastering its treacherous nature. Compounding these problems was the BMW 003 jet engine. While simpler than the power plants on the Me-262, it was still a temperamental early-generation turbojet, prone to flameouts and delivering less thrust than ideally required, resulting in a relatively slow acceleration and climb rate for a jet fighter. The operational history of the Volksjager was as brief and chaotic as the program that created it. By the time the first aircraft were delivered to their only operational unit, Jagdgeschwader 1, in April of 1945, the war had mere weeks left. The front lines were collapsing, fuel was almost non-existent, and the Allied air forces owned the skies completely. The He-162 saw only the most fleeting and inconclusive combat. There are vague and unconfirmed claims of a kill against a British fighter, but no record exists to substantiate it. For the pilots of JG-1, many of whom were seasoned veterans, the transition to the new jet was a perilous undertaking. They found themselves grappling not only with enemy aircraft but with the mortal dangers of their own machine. Training flights often ended in disaster, with pilots falling victim to the aircraft's tricky handling, structural failures, or engine problems. In the end, the greatest enemy of the He-162 pilot was not the Allied pilot in a Tempest or Mustang, but the aircraft sitting on the runway behind him. More salamanders were lost to accidents and mechanical failures in its short service life than were ever lost to enemy action, a final, tragic testament to a weapon born of desperation and doomed by its own compromised design. By May 1945, the dream of the Volksjäger lay in ruins, quite literally. As Allied forces swept into the heart of Germany and Austria, they began uncovering the program's dispersed and hidden production facilities. What they found was a scene of surreal industrial archaeology. Salt mines and forest tunnels filled with rows of completed, semi-assembled, and crated He-162 airframes. In a little over 8 months, the German aviation industry had managed to produce well over 100 finished aircraft, with components for hundreds more in the pipeline. Yet, this frantic output was utterly meaningless. The infrastructure to support them had collapsed, the fuel to fly them was gone, and the Reich they were built to defend had ceased to exist. The war ended not with a last stand of the people's fighter, but with its capture on the ground. In the aftermath, the strange diminutive jet became a prized trophy for the victorious Allied powers. Under Operation Seahorse and similar intelligence-gathering missions, the Americans, British, French, and Soviets systematically located and shipped dozens of captured He-162s back to their respective countries. They were subjected to intense technical evaluation, their innovative and compromised design pored over by engineers seeking to understand German jet technology and learn from its lessons. This widespread dispersal for analysis is the primary reason why, despite its extremely short and unsuccessful combat career, a surprisingly large number of He-162s survive today in museums around the world. Pristine examples can be found as centerpiece exhibits in institutions like the Smithsonian Stephen F. Udvar-Hazy Center in the United States, the RAF Museum London in the United Kingdom, and the Musée de l'Air de l'Espace in France, serving as silent ambassadors of a failed program. This survival forces a final assessment of the Salamander's place in history. Judged by its intended purpose, to be a simple, mass-produced war-winning weapon flown by novice pilots, the He-162 was an unqualified and utter failure. It was too dangerous for its intended pilots, arrived far too late, and had no measurable impact on the air war. However, to dismiss it entirely is to miss its profound significance. The He-162 stands as a breathtaking, if terrifying, testament to desperate ingenuity and the sheer force of political will. It represents a shocking feat of engineering under extreme pressure, a demonstration that a modern jet aircraft could be conceived, designed, and flown in under 90 days. Its story is not one of martial glory, but of a technological what-if born from the final frantic throes of a collapsing regime. It remains a powerful and enduring symbol of how innovation, when driven by sheer desperation, can achieve the seemingly impossible, even when the result is ultimately futile. The story of the Heinkel He-162 Salamander is ultimately the story of the Third Reich's final, gasping breath. It was a machine conceived in desperation, born from a terrifying mix of radical innovation and profound compromise. It was flawed, it was deadly to its own pilots, and as a war-winning weapon, it was a complete and undeniable failure. Yet, its very existence, a jet fighter designed and built in 90 days, stands as a powerful and chilling monument to a regime's frantic attempt to stave off inevitable defeat through technological brute force. While it failed to change the outcome of the war, its incredible story of breakneck development and its uniquely dangerous design ensure that the Volksjäger, this rarest of World War II planes, will never be forgotten. If you enjoyed this deep dive into this forgotten corner of aviation history, if you find these stories of strange and secret weapons fascinating, then please help support the channel. Be sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more content exploring the hidden stories and technological marvels of the past. We have many more tales just like this one waiting for you. Now we want to hear from you. Given its radical design and its terrifying flaws, what do you think? Could the He-162 have made a tangible difference in the air war if it had been developed and deployed a year earlier, or was its fundamental design doomed from the start? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.